Special thanks to our headlining sponsors, Extenet, ZenWave, and Solid.
This is actually a very important opportunity for the commercial real estate sector, as well as the industry, to dig into the issues around in-building coverage. And I've got the pleasure for the next several minutes of hosting a panel that's going to focus on the public safety dimension. We've heard a lot of discussion about the tenants, the value, the commercial value of having in-building systems that are capable, but there's also a dimension that touches people's lives. And this building is sitting on a site where about a year ago, on July 7/7/7, there was a horrible, horrible incident that required the response of Dallas officials, police officers, firefighters, and emergency medical officials to an unfolding incident. We've heard it described earlier today by the building management, but it really brings home these structures are communities, they're dynamic communities, and they're communities where people's lives can come to an end. And we can take action to make sure that doesn't happen. So joining me in this discussion are two amazing experts in the field. First is John Foley, and John serves as general manager of one of the more remarkable industry groups that have come about recently. This is Safer Buildings Coalition. It's a group of equipment suppliers, the network operators. I believe you have commercial real estate folks. It's just a wide range of entities working to make buildings safer by improving the communication systems in these buildings. Shawn Kelley joins us as well, and Shawn comes with years of experience as a communication specialist with Dallas Fire Rescue, so a significant metro fire agency with tremendous responsibilities. And he brings a unique perspective. We'll be taking questions towards the end of our time. I do want to say that we've been fortunate enough to get Shawn to come up here and speak, but there's some topics that he will have to be careful about addressing. He's not going to be talking about code enforcement policy, so don't ask him when your permit's going to be approved. And he's not going to speculate about what the city policies will be going forward as the code changes. It's just, I heard a rumor, it's way above his pay grade. So my background, as Jeff said, I'm an industry analyst. I track wireless infrastructure. That's my passion. I have a parallel passion. Aside from my grandchildren, I have a parallel passion, and that is firefighting. I've been a firefighter since I don't want to say. It's been way too long. When I came out of university, I was a firefighter paramedic and I actually worked in a 911 call center. And then I made the segue to become rich in tech. And yeah, that was not smart. At any rate, so let's get going. What I'd like to do first is kind of ask the question, public safety. What is it? What are we talking about when we talk about public safety communications and in-building? And John, since you've been a whirlwind of activity in different cities, helping cities come to grips with this, could you just kick us off with some reflections about what is this topic we're talking about?
Yeah, thanks, Ken. I'm happy to do that. I should tell you a little bit about myself. I'm the odd duck on the panel here. I come from a law enforcement family, and I'm sitting between two fire service people.
We love you, John.
So when Ken said we have two brilliant experts, I thought he was going to say two brilliant experts and John Foley. However, my grandfather was a cop, his brother was a cop, my brother was a cop, my son's a cop, and my son's wearing my brother's badge. So this is very personal to me. But my career has been in telecommunications. I've been doing this for a long time, almost as long as Ron Scott. So. And by the way, among our members is Extenet. We're grateful for that, as well as many of the other speakers here. What we're talking about is in-building communications when it counts. Can you be heard when it's needed most, right? And that's not just firefighter or EMS or police radios. It's can you dial 911? If you dial 911, can they find you? If someone sends a mass communication text message for students to shelter in place, will they receive that message? And then finally, when the first responder shows up, can they communicate once they're inside the building, both with each other, with their team out on the curb, or back to dispatch? if they need more resources. And it's just part of the reality, the physics of how radios work, that materials block radio signals. Newer materials block it even more effectively, okay? So if you've got a high energy efficient skin that you've just added to the building, or it's a new building and it's already there, you have low E glass, it does a really, really job of keeping radiation out, sunlight. Well, that's what RF is, just a different frequency band, and it does a good job of keeping that out too. Everything that a radio wave passes through attenuates it. Steel, concrete, glass, bodies, cars in a parking garage. So that's the problem. The problem is, how do you get the radio signal where it needs to be? How do you accurately locate the person that needs to be accurately located? The SEC tells us that a 1-minute improvement in response time for an emergency would save 10,000 lives a year. If there's anybody here that's, these guys are in the fire service, if someone has a heart attack and the heart stops, you have about 4 minutes before brain death occurs. So this is a very real thing. So that's how you frame up the problem. The question is, how do you solve it?
Indeed, indeed. So, John, you work with a lot of folks in the industry that have solutions. That was basically the impetus for the group going. People want to sell kit. So clearly there are some solutions out there. What are the top of mind solutions that you're seeing?
You know, technology is not the problem here. There's plenty of great tech. The problem is who's going to pay for it? Who's going to value it? You know, you have to size the solution to the problem. Sometimes in a very large facility, nothing's going to beat a full-blown fiber DAS that's going to get the signal everywhere it needs to be at the right power levels. In a smaller, but 50% of the buildings, commercial real estate buildings in the United States, are 5,000 square feet or smaller. And then there's a whole layer in between, you know, that is in that 5,000 to 500,000 square feet. So you need all kinds of solutions, small cell. Sometimes the radio signals penetrate through the walls and you don't have to do anything until they build another building next door and you're in an RF shadow and then the signal don't get there anymore. So it comes back to the best technology to fight this problem is to have great infrastructure in place in the risers. You have pathway, you have conduit, you have fiber. You have things that are, somebody who just said, I don't want to hurt you twice. I don't want to hurt your building twice, right? Well, I don't want to hurt your wallet twice either. So if you put the fiber in, you put the conduit in, it's professionally managed, it's where it needs to be. That's a whole lot better than coming back later and opening up the walls again or opening up the ceilings again or, God forbid, core drilling more holes in the floor and doing x-rays and all the thing it takes to get professionally installed infrastructure. So that's the best technology. The rest of it, whatever you got today, they're going to have something better tomorrow.
Okay.
They're not going to make better glass tomorrow.
Indeed. So, Shawn, let me just turn the discussion to you. So one of the things I absolutely love about being a firefighter is the kitchen table. You know, we sit around and we share stories and we complain. We complain about lots of different things. Now, you have a customer base which consists of a large number of kitchen tables.
Indeed.
And with your customer base, you know, how do you and your customers think about radio as a lifeline?
Yeah, certainly that's something that it's an often used cliche that you'll hear that a police officer or a firefighter's or a paramedic's radio can be their lifeline, but it truly is in a lot of cases. We do a lot of different jobs in the building too, and I think it's worth, you know, kind of thinking about, you know, some of the differences between, you know, best effort sort of coverage and mission critical sort of coverage because of the types of things that we do in buildings. So yes, I have a customer base that's not always your most astute consumer of technology. And their expectations are quite high. They want to push and they want to talk and they want to be heard. And actually that's a fairly realistic expectation that we really need to have for our personnel when they're engaged in the activities that we're engaged in. So it's a mission critical thing And not to, I'll probably get ahead of something here in some of my thoughts about that, but it's oftentimes different than what you would have for a commercial customer in a building. Because I'm going to have customers that are in a broom closet, and I'm going to have customers in stairwells that need those technologies to work. So on one hand, yes, I have customers that are very easily upset when their technology doesn't work, and we hear about that, and they want a solution now, and frankly, they deserve one. But also, more importantly, just from doing the job right and serving the citizens correctly, and then also taking care of our own personnel, we need that technology to work right. So.
Let me advance the slide, and what I put up here is just two things. First of all, a picture, because everybody likes pictures. So October 14th, 2017, we got rousted out of bed at 7 o'clock in the morning for alarm bells, or what in the fire service we like to call bells and smells. Because large buildings, the fire alarm systems are continually going off with smoke detector malfunctions, et cetera. And we turned the corner, and to our surprise, pumping out of this building was a massive amount of smoke. That woke us up. And we went to work. Fire was knocked by the sprinkler system. And as we're picking up, I took a picture of the scene. But this was a brand new building. And after the incident was over, it dawned on us. We did not have to go to Plan B for radio communications. Oh, wait a minute, we did not have to go to Plan C for radio communications. And what we do when we have to change our plans is we're moving to repeaters that are brought by the battalion chief, or we're going on our Plan C, we're going to talk around where we just go simplex and start shouting at people. And no, the incident flowed seamlessly with no interruptions to radio communications. It was just remarkable difference from the other buildings which are older in our jurisdiction. I also put up on that slide just a schematic of what one of these systems looks like. This one that I have up here is a more complicated one. It's a fiber DAS. So the coverage system is in a larger building like this where you have fiber running up the riser. But over the years, in our area, as we've changed our radio system from low band to high band, we've lost coverage in many of our buildings. And so now we're constantly getting honks on our system, and it slows the operation down just when you really need people to be moving quickly and acting to mitigate the problem. And that prevents property loss, and it saves lives. So these systems, it's an investment to put it in, but it makes a big difference going forward. So this is a new thing potentially for Dallas. As you guys start looking at your future, what kinds of things are you thinking about?
Yeah, sure. So there are a lot of factors that are kicking in that are causing these things. John mentioned low E glass and construction technologies that are really altering the way that we have our RF propagation into buildings is changing. Public safety radio systems around the country have been transitioning over the years. My home department is looking at a current transition to a new radio system technology that frankly is going to end up with probably more challenges for in-building coverage than what we currently have.
And why is that? Why is it going to be harder?
Well, so for instance, in our case, we're moving from using traditional UHF analog communications on scene, and primarily most of what we do is simplex, and it works 98% really well of the time. Yeah. And as we move to 700 megahertz simulcast systems, these systems are built on lower towers. They're radiating less power than what we have on the old, blaring systems and things for system coverage. So we're seeing those systems that are really becoming the standard around the country that really reduce our effectiveness in buildings without some help. Now, that also should raise the question: well, why are you doing something that is going to be a detriment? But there are other factors involved in that as well. So we have to be able to play with our neighbors. They need to be able to play with us. These systems are, somebody mentioned earlier, the idea of having interoperability and common sorts of standards, having open standards that can bring disparate systems together. And all of these factors together are driving the public safety market to those types of systems. So there are some detriments involved in that migration, but there are also benefits involved as well.
What's kind of challenging in Dallas is you've got a system today that works really well, and the coverage of the buildings is pretty darn good. But in order to get better capacity on your system to meet the FCC rules for getting the channels smaller, now you're moving to a frequency range. It's potentially going to be shocking to the end users. You may have firefighter communications, police communications go dark in a lot of structures around this town in the not too distant future.
Right, and that's where we also, it's incumbent on us to have our Plan Bs and our Plan Cs. And those are going to be important going forward. But as we move, traditionally in the fire service, we've looked at the fire service. We haven't looked so much at John's family's traditions.
We care about them.
We care, but it hasn't been our priority. We want to go put wet stuff on red stuff primarily. But we really don't have to look beyond the headlines today to see the other things that we really have to do these days. So we're going to more events in buildings where we're having to work alongside with police. And it could be something as simple as a medical emergency on the 70th floor of this building that's going to take some coordination probably to get our crews to the right spot. Or it can be something much more complex, as we saw a couple of years ago near this spot. So those things are also driving our needs in buildings to a different extent than what we've had in the past.
So authorities having jurisdiction grapple with this change that's happening. What do you see as the key challenges for the RAHJs interacting with the commercial real estate sector, the engineers, architects? How does this hit you?
Yeah, so it does put a burden on the code enforcement official, which thankfully I am not.
You're not.
I'm a technical guy. But our code enforcement official now has to take into consideration things that John can probably speak to much better. But if you look at the two primary codes that we have the International Fire Code and the NFPA code. If you're a building owner and you look at that, it's got a lot of scary words and things in it that you probably don't want to look at. So you have to rely on the right resource to come in and take care of those things. Well, that same burden is also on that authority having jurisdiction, because we're asking building owner to comply with a standard, and then we need to understand whether he's complied with that standard or not. So we have to build resources into our operation to be able to handle that. And John, you can probably speak to what other agencies have done and what you're seeing around the country as to how different agencies are addressing that. But it's still a work in progress for us.
It's been so challenging because so much of the code enforcement has been to signage, exit signs, sprinkler systems, stairwells, RF. These folks run screaming in terror when they hear the term RF. So John, you say for building, you folks have been doing an education program to help code officials around the country come to grips with this new topic.
Yeah, it's a problem of scale. So what a lot of jurisdictions are doing, they're actually hiring people out of radio shops who have the expertise already. Some jurisdictions have looked at that in the face of coming up with budget for hiring new skill sets that they don't have gone back to older standards or abandoned the move to bring it in all together. Bringing it back into focus for a commercial real estate professional, this is already business that conceptually you understand. You understand what it's like to work with a fire alarm company. You know what it's like to work with a sprinkler company or an electrician or a plumber. They have to get competent professional designs done, put on the drawing, stamped by an engineer, reviewed by the permit guy and the code official, and it's inspected. This is really nothing different. It's just a newer technology, right? So in terms of scaling, it's a matter of getting everyone together and starting to share common practices with each other. So in jurisdictions like in California and Florida, Colorado and other places where they've been doing this, Northern Virginia, They've been doing this for quite a while. These checklists, you know, a plan check checklist, the design criteria, the test acceptance procedures, and so forth. Folks have worked really hard and kicked the tires on those things and refined them. Well, there's no reason to start from scratch. There's no reason for the code official to start from scratch, and there's no reason for the building owner to start from scratch. I think what it comes down to is engaging in a conversation like this one to say, listen, pay attention to this because it's coming. And it's not all bad news, okay? Because there's some things that you can do. These things do cost money. They are required by code. As we move forward, it's going to be required more and more. This is coming to you. So what can you do to get in front of that and maybe even add some additional capabilities? Maybe you could never really prove in, for example, a cellular reinforcement system for your building. You know your tenants want it, but you couldn't figure out what the ROI or the NOI is on it, right? Well, now the fire code official comes and says, you have to put this system in. Okay, well, you've already got the labor force there. You already got the walls and ceilings open. You already got the holes, right? You've already got a designer in place. What are we going to do? Maybe pull a couple extra fibers and put a couple extra amplifiers and a couple extra antennas on top of that? That's something you ought to be thinking about, because what you don't want to do is put all the money out to do the thing that you have to do and then pay double to put in the thing that you want to do. So it comes down to planning. A commercial real estate professional needs to plan here and get educated, and that's what we're trying to do here. And the code officials too. There's nobody that doesn't want everybody to come home safe. Let's just be clear about that. They just don't want to spend more money than they have to, and they want to do it the right way at the right time.
So Shawn, as you're thinking about how the environment is changing from an AHJ perspective, the customer base you're supporting of firefighters, what are the chief concerns that are popping out in your mind?
Well, there are a lot of challenges, and I could just sit here and chunk some grenades into the room to let people worry about more things, I guess. But there are challenges that we face is knowing just which buildings, are going to, need to be dealt with as we transition to a new system. Questions of retroactively doing things or grandfathering them in or not, or just introducing it at the point of, a significant remodeling that means that you pull a permit and then you have to do it. Just all kinds of concerns that are way out of my area of things that I deal with, but it's still questions about how this is actually going to happen within the city. We've mentioned future-proofing things on our side, not so much the 5G stuff, but the Band 14 stuff for FirstNet is really going to be one of the biggest unknowns for us as to what our use of that technology is going forward. Does it need to be mission critical coverage in structures or not? That's going to be a choice that my jurisdiction deals with. They're going to decide that, okay, that can be a best effort sort of thing. Or if it's something that we rely on as a mission critical service, then certainly that will have to be incorporated into any kind of building enhancement, coverage enhancement, to get that service covered as well. So lots of unknowns for us going forward. That's probably some of the biggest challenges that I see.
What's really interesting about the introduction of FirstNet, this band 14, for folks who don't know, that's a cellular band that provides support for mobile data. And it's the arrangement that AT&T has with the federal government to operate this band on their behalf allows AT&T to use that for commercial customers. So there's the possibility that we may end up mandating band 14 in a building, and voila, AT&T customers suddenly have coverage in that building if they have a device that's on band 14. That'll be a new world when we get to that point. And I don't think that's imminent. FirstNet, the federal government, AT&T, I think are still stroking their chins, wondering what are we going to do about in-building? Right now they're dealing so much with just the great outdoors and trying to cover Montana, not so much.
Yeah, my crystal ball's maybe a little foggy as far as what that looks like. But if you look at our, current data usage, Law enforcement probably has a different perspective on that than we do, and a lot of people have forward-thinking, vision of how that sort of technology and broadband in general can be used. But I probably see that more being out on the streets for the near future.
Yeah, and at least in the initial.
Well, I guess I want to ask the question, are you saying you see it been on the streets because that's where you think the technology is going to be deployed, or because that's where it's needed?
At least on the fire service side, and I'm not a huge forward thinker on some of those sorts of issues probably, but I don't see that going into the building quite as much on the fire service side maybe. Now I say that, I can argue with myself about some subjects. If you look at our emergency medical services and our reliance on data,
primarily a data operation, actually.
Absolutely, yeah. So, if our crews are used to using that tool, out of a building, and now you're face to face, dealing with the customer, within a structure, and that doesn't work, are our plan Bs and plan Cs going to be acceptable in those cases? So if we migrate our primary means of data communication to that service, are there going to be adequate workarounds if it's not in the building? So.
It's interesting. Across the United States, responsibility for emergency medical care is slowly shifting to the fire service because our buildings aren't burning anymore. And we have a lot of bored firefighters, and we don't want to give them up because we like them to be 4 minutes away. And so they're taking a lot of responsibilities on the medical side. So that may cause the fire service to be going, hey, let's get better data service in these buildings.
Yeah, the lion's share of the miles we're putting on the wheels out there is for medical service.
Indeed,
for sure.
So John, let's turn to the commercial real estate impact. I think you started touching on this earlier. What do you think commercial real estate professionals should be doing now? What should be their mindset with this topic, which, it's in different stages in different parts of the nation? How should they be thinking about this?
So the technologies are merging. Without getting into a debate about whether or not FirstNet will or won't be needed in buildings or make it into buildings or whatever, what FirstNet is essentially it's a commercial cellular service that's being leveraged to provide a data-rich situational awareness for public safety. But it's also, when it's not being used for public safety, is used for the public itself can use it, and for operational efficiencies and other things like that. I know you guys don't talk about this a lot, but a police officer spends about 2 hours a day doing paperwork.
No.
Yes. And so if we could improve their operational efficiencies, I've asked police agencies, the people that have to do the budgets and hire people, if you could cut that 2 hours down to 15 minutes or 30 minutes a day, whether it's offloading body cameras or doing geofencing to figure out where he spent his time or whatever, if I could give you an hour and a half back, what would that do to your force loading? And they light up. Yeah. They think about what that money is. So it's not just about when there's an emergency happening. We're moving into a whole nother data-rich world beyond how we've always done things. I've heard firefighters tell me, just give me a radio and a hose and I'm good to go. But wouldn't it be good to know, as you're walking into a building, where all the people are clustered? Wouldn't it be good to know that there's a fuel tank on the second level that's full of diesel fuel? Wouldn't it be nice to know where all the smoke is concentrated, where the hot spots are, before you went in the building? So that's coming. And wouldn't it be nice to be able to dial 911 when you needed to and be located? Wouldn't it be nice if the mass notification text could get to where they need to be? You need to stop bifurcating between public safety radio and cellular radio and realize it's not about technology, it's about being able to communicate, right? So once you get there and realize that you have something you have to do that's very, very close to something you'd like to do, how can you leverage those investments? As a commercial real estate professional, some of it comes down to priorities. What buildings? You said, what buildings should we do first? Well, in Broward County, Florida, they've just said all the schools. And you know why, because you read the news, okay? Well, where else? Well, how about hospitals? You know where EMTs use their radio a lot? In hospitals. They certainly do it in your apartment when they're helping you, but But then they're looking for their next call when they're dropping the guy off in the hospital and their radio don't work. Sometimes they're reaching for their cell phones, okay? So prioritizing it. From a commercial real estate perspective in an office tower, do you know if you have a problem? The testing is pretty simple. You can go in and have someone come in and test your building to tell you whether you got an issue. I can tell you right now, my phone on this floor, on the 70th floor of this building, I have 3G.
Yeah, I've had issues all afternoon.
Not surprising, it's really an unoccupied floor, but it's not unusual to be this high up and for there to be an issue, right? So what should you do? You should do what you can in advance to have a plan. It all starts with a plan. What is your connectivity plan? Do you know how to write a connectivity plan? Do you need someone to help you write a connectivity plan? Are they considering all the things that can ride over common infrastructure? The real simple stuff, the bones. What are the bones of your communication network? It's risers, it's conduits, it's fiber, it's pathway. Do you have good bones? Is it professionally managed? Is it professionally documented and maintained? Does it have enough capacity for the future, right? If you have those things, then whatever it is, whether FirstNet comes or doesn't come, whether CBRS comes or doesn't come, 5G, it really doesn't matter. It's all going to use the same bones. That's what you should be doing now. And you should be paying attention to these other things, because pretty soon, your tenants are going to be, they're not going to be just asking, they're going to be demanding that they have connectivity in the building. They're going to get it written in, big companies are going to get it written into their leases that they expect to have connectivity. And if they don't, they're going to go somewhere else. So you have, on the one hand, a regime that the fire code officials are requiring it. You have it that the tenants want it. Bite the bullet now, because you don't want to do it later after the walls get closed up and the ceilings get closed up. Go find out what your test, go get it tested and find out. You may not have a problem until they build a building next door, and then you do. But find out where you are. What's your baseline? Those are the things you can do today. And they don't cost a lot of money. It costs a lot more money not to do it.
So you travel a lot across the United States, visiting the different
what
regions.
City is this?
Yeah, I know. You were saying that this is city number 3 for you this week. But
in the last 2 days.
Good heavens. So,
you ever show up at the airline counter and you go,
I have no idea where I'm going.
Where am I going today? And they look in and they say, Seattle. I like Seattle. Thank you.
Yeah,
that's a nice town.
So in your travels, what commercial real estate practices have really popped out at you as maybe thinking a little bit advanced, perhaps should be emulated by other professionals in the commercial real estate sector?
I don't think I'm qualified to answer that question. I could tell you that the things that I'm saying to do, there are people that have done those things, getting ready. And a lot of times it's happening in the context of making a smart building plan. There's all kinds of infrastructure. There's all kinds of benefits and assets that you can put over these bones, whether it's digital lighting, access control cameras. Buildings are just getting so much smarter. They're going to be designing buildings differently. I can also tell you that as property development happens, there's a big entertainment and retail complex being built in North Jersey right now that it's completely changing. A shopping place has to be a destination. 30% of the real estate in an urban district is used for parking cars. Well, as we start to get to automated vehicles, you're not going to need such big garages anymore, okay? So it's going to change the shape of buildings. You got to stay in touch with that. You got to know what's coming. And there are developers, I'll say it this way, I can't necessarily speak at the building level, but I could say at the developer level, there's developers that are very forward-thinking. They're not building just buildings anymore, they're building small communities. You'll see it'll have a hotel, and it'll have a commercial office space, and then it'll have all this housing, and then there'll be a supermarket, maybe a movie theater and a golf course, and it's all in one contiguous space. They want you to come home and stay there. In fact, they'd like you to walk to work, right? So the development companies that are developing those kinds of communities, I'll tell you, they get it.
Oh. Lovely. So I think we have time for some questions. Are there questions from the audience that you'd like to raise with our experts in the back? Do we have a microphone for somebody to speak into for questions so that
We can repeat it.
the webinar?
We just, I'll relay it if it's needed.
Lovely. Go ahead. And would you introduce yourself and your affiliation?
Yeah, my name is Scott Usfolk. I'm with IBT Connect. So if I was a building owner and I was in a city that had an ordinance and a code, and I knew that my building floor, one of the floors, didn't get coverage for emergency responders, I'm assuming if I put in a system out of my pocket with my cost, I'm not going to be able to charge my tenants money because it's not a service that they're receiving that they will be willing to pay. I'm assuming my payback is really going to come with reduced liability, because if, God forbid, somebody were to die and I didn't meet the code, then I'm going to end up in court. They're going to come after me, I'm assuming, not the AHJ. So again, I think I know the answer, but if you can qualify and say I'm off or on as far as I reduce my liability, that's really my payback directly. Is that a true statement?
Yeah, that's an easy one for me because my job stops when I say, you've got to do that. So then John can probably figure out all the real benefits of beyond just compliance. Because really, and I say that jokingly, but really our side of it is strictly just looking at compliance. But compliance for an obvious real world reason as well. So as long as we get that done, we're taking care of our people, we're supplying the service that we need to the citizens. That's where our concerns as far as
if there's an annual inspection and the folks come through and they determine you're not compliant, officials could shut the building down. They could revoke the occupancy permit until it's corrected. But I don't think anybody does that, but
right.
It could
but I'm
be
sure
done.
John can probably speak better to the
I can give you some analogies. So what happens if an amusement park ride is not inspected or maintained and someone gets hurt? What happens if a sprinkler system is not installed, or what happens if an electrical panel is installed over the capacity that it should be? These are all pretty well understood things. Does anybody here know in what year the first fire sprinkler code was required? Anybody know? It's 1896. So you're talking about some regimes that are very mature, right? This RF regime is brand new, okay? So to the answer to the question about liability, there's a difference. I learned this a long time ago, and I'll tell you afterwards where I learned it. But there's a big difference between what makes common sense and what actually happens in a court of law. You would think that there would be some presumption of liability. You'd be amazed to hear that some people think that if you put the system in, you create a liability for yourself if it fails to function, and you'd be better off having never put it in to begin with. I've actually heard this argument more than once, okay? Now, a few years ago, there was legislation passed at the federal level that protected companies that put in 911 center equipment installations and the people that work in them, for example, okay? So you couldn't sue them if something went wrong. That makes sense to me. And I think, I could tell you right now, I worked at a large system integrator company that refused to do public safety work because of their presumption that they could get sued if they didn't do it correctly or if it failed at a critical time. Well, how would you like it if fire sprinkler companies, you know what, we're not going to put them in anymore because if the sprinkler system don't work, I mean, it's ridiculous, right? I'm not aware of any case law, I'm not aware of any litigation, and I'm also not aware of any insurance company to give you a break if you put one of these systems in. It's just not considered. We've got to stop worrying about those kinds of things and start worrying about, somebody said it earlier, it was Ron Zimmer in the first presentation, the most valuable asset in a building is the people. We've got to stop thinking about doing what we have to do and start thinking about what we should do and what we want to do. We've got to change the culture. I know that probably doesn't directly answer your question, but I've been meeting with Chubb insurance companies and others. I've been meeting with attorneys. Somebody point to me a case. Maybe there is one, but I can't find it.
Alrighty. Again, you introduce yourself.
Yes, Raul Guerra, also with Intelligent Building Technology Connect, IBT Connect. So Shawn, it sounds like you're saying that your role is to tell the building owner, developer, whatever, you are required to put in an amplification or test the building for an amplification system, and you leave it at that, and it's going to happen. And then when it's eventually built, the AHJ comes in and tests according to the ISC specs that City of Dallas has adopted. Is that process?
Yeah, and I'll speak more in general terms, in terms of how it should work. It should work just like it does with any of the other code enforcement concerns. Through the same processes, you'd still be dealing with your new construction inspection individual or whatever through the plans process. I think it's real important that before any of this really, before you turn any wheels on any of this, to find out exactly what's required in the specific jurisdiction that you're dealing with. Two primary codes that I think that we deal with, but you can have local amendments and you can have local exceptions to those. So it's all got to be answered through that code enforcement official. And sorry, that's not me. I'm not the code enforcement official.
Your job stops by saying, just get it done.
Well, perhaps that was more of a generalized term, just in answering that question of from a fire service perspective, what is our concern on the return on investment or the liabilities involved in that.
Does the City of Dallas actually withhold the CO? Do you know that? Do they?
I can't answer that question for you. That's something that our code people do, and fortunately I don't have to.
I can
be
answer
involved
for
with
you.
that.
Right now, the City of Dallas doesn't require these systems. They exclude this section of IFC 510 today. That's just today. It's written in. Yeah.
Because they have a system today that works really well and doesn't require the challenge coming that you can look down the road. They're putting in a modern system that will be challenged by the buildings, and so the code will probably have to adjust. We're out of time. I'm going to wrap it up, but I will say the way the code is crafted and enforced varies dramatically from community to community. So take a rock and throw it to Plano, and it's going to be different from what happens here in the city. I've written an analysis that shows representative interpretations across about 15 jurisdictions around the nation. It's remarkable how much complexity and variation. Thank you. Please join me in thanking our panelists for a tremendous discussion. Thank you.
Good job.
Thank you, Ken.
Special thanks to our headlining sponsors, Extenet, Zenwave, and Solid.